You'll know if you should buy Crimson Desert in the next 83 seconds. Here's your TLDR. Crimson Desert gave me game whiplash faster than any title in a very long time. It arrived with a level of hype that reminded me of the original BioShock, only to deliver a launch experience defined by death by 1,000 cuts of UI frustration, plotting controls, and inconsistent physics. Now, if you played this one on day one, you were fighting through jank that would test even a God Hand or Winback fan. I would know. I'm the guy who actually liked both of those titles. However, Pearl Abyss has started patching the game like absolute mad lads. They're listening to player feedback without overcorrecting, mysteriously somehow fixing the broken and the jank in record time. It is a rare instance of a developer proving me wrong through sheer post-launch effort, and I am so happy to be wrong here. Realistically, the bottom line is, if you can survive a genuinely awful, and I do mean awful, first 10 to 12 hours of onboarding in a controller scheme that feels like you're entering a Smash tournament while intoxicated, you are rewarded with a massive, self-directed sandbox action RPG with flavors of Muso. It is not for the narrative enjoyer, the impatient, or the easily frustrated, or those with limited physical dexterity playing on a controller. That said, it has earned a permanent place on my hard drive because it's unafraid to try something new, in a genre that has become a checklist by way of map markers affair. Crimson Desert launched on Steam, PS5, and Xbox on March 19th, 2026 for $70 or your regional equivalent. Now, if all you wanted was that TLDR, cool, I get it. Thanks for sticking around. Before you go though, do us a favor and hit the YouTube buttons. It tells the robots on the back end at YouTube that this was a useful video and we'll push it to more people. Oh, and if you're new here, hi, I'm Squid. I cover action and shooter titles with the occasional essay or gear review. And the name of the game here is Maximum Meaningful Info with minimum reaction faces. So let's talk about the crunchy caramel core of the gameplay loop here. And 120 hours in, I still feel as though I've only scratched the surface of everything this game has to offer. But to understand Crimson Desert fully, I think we have to ignore the marketing fluff and look at the mechanical reality of what it is you're going to be doing. This is a classic third-person RPG at its core. You've got gear, skill upgrades, exploration, secrets, but it is mandatory that you treat this as an open-world sandbox, where points of interest give you some guidance on things to do that are hopefully in that area that are fun. There are some bounties that I flat out refuse to do because the run back would be 20 minutes, and I ain't got time for that. That said, I did wind up playing for 4 hours last night and had 0 combat encounters and found myself having fun, which is weird, because if you've been around the channel at all, you know that combat mechanics are kind of my bread and butter. So, I mean, that says something about the game, I think. Now, the narrative on offer here is really just spackle for the gaps. It exists merely as breadcrumbs to lead you towards side quests and points of interest, which is where the game really does find its soul. If you want a game to provide the fun for you, or you want a gripping linear narrative, you're going to be cranky. This is the world for a self-directed player. To define the gameplay, it's perhaps easiest to think about it as a mashup here. You've got the freeform exploration of Breath of the Wild, a diet version of The Witcher 3's world building, and the sheer density and scope of an MMO. Let's take a second to talk about that. I see the single-player MMO label bandied about online about this game, and that was a little bit of a head-scratcher for me initially. I mean, yes, the game started life as an MMO and then later pivoted to a single-player RPG. I get that. And you can still feel that with some of the quest and puzzle design that I think would play much, much better with the addition of other players in your party. Now, while it captures a vast world with activities that feel like they continue while you aren't there, each chapter can still feel a bit disjointed. Yeah, it's kind of like that moment when you first went from the Barrens to Ashenvale. You're in the same story, but everything feels different enough to be a metaphorical record scratch that might leave some people feeling a bit disoriented. And plus, there's always the potential to Western Plaguelands yourself if you're the explory type. If you know, you know. So I suppose that also fits with the single-player MMO description as well. Ultimately, this is a title for the single-player purist who isn't afraid to play a game that respects their intelligence and demands that they leverage that intelligence. It is a game that refuses to be predictable, often ducking and weaving whenever you think you've figured out its rules. It represents a zero hand-holding philosophy that the industry has largely abandoned in favor of focus group safety and content via repetition. And everything I've encountered so far in my 120 hours in-game has been bespoke. And at this point, I'll be surprised if I ever encounter any Ubi-style repetition as the game goes on. Moving on to art, audio, and vibes. The UI in-game is minimalistic and clean, which I love. It lets you focus on the chaos you're visiting on hordes of enemies. However, the menus are a nightmare. They remind me of gacha-style interfaces, even if the game itself, mercifully, doesn't have those mechanics. Seriously? I was getting Where Winds Meet flashbacks. And the lighting itself is used for immersion. Nighttime actually means it's dark. You cannot see without torchlight, which completely changes the tone of exploration. This will be friction for some, but for me, it's a welcome feature. It's nice to see this attention to detail in a game that's not focused on stealth. I mean, sure, there's that one hidden blade thing you can go find and pretend you're in Assassin's Creed, but why? Overall, the art design leans low fantasy until later in the game, but that fits within the overall world. Even if it can make the individual chapters feel a little bit disjointed, I don't see a whole lot of separation by silhouette from enemy to enemy outside of a few specific variations here. You're going to fight a lot of bandits. So many bandits. All the bandits. Now, as for that tonal shift I mentioned a moment ago, I'm not going to spoil it for you here, but if you have a decisive lack of steampunk in your life, this will fix that. And the sound design is solid. I have no complaints about hit feedback, combat sounds, or ambiance. Wandering around Only Hernand is filled with legit nature sounds. At one point had me legitimately wondering if I stayed up entirely too late, and the birds I was hearing were outside instead of in-game. That's the worst gaming-related feeling, by the way. I think worse than 1% wipes, I'd say. Now, the shop music does lean a bit more Cisco hold music number 3 than I'd prefer, but that's a minor complaint within the broader scope of things. The VO is done impeccably, even if the story scaffolding underneath it is lacking. I mean, at this point, a cursory Googling reveals the story to be laughably irrelevant at best. We don't need to retread that ground to pad for watch time here. The story's kind of bad, come on. But you're not here for that. You're here for the sandbox. Moving on to performance and settings. So let's talk hardware. My baseline for this review is the 9800X3D, paired with a 5090 and 64 gigs of DDR5. And yes, I'm very thankful I built this rig before the current absurdity of pricing to fuel data centers and our eventual AI corporate overlords started. Now, running at 1440p with optimized graphic settings, ray tracing and reconstruction on, and FrameGen off, I held a steady 170 to 180 FPS with DLSS 4.5 set to balanced. I did note some frame time spikes as various assets loaded during world traversal, but nothing I would call disruptive to moment-to-moment gameplay. Like when you're in combat, you're not going to hitch. It's great. Now, for those of you chasing silly motion clarity, maybe you have a pulsar monitor. Maybe try turning on FrameGen. In my testing, the extra couple milliseconds of input lag from streaming over Moonlight to my living room television didn't matter much. So the delay from FrameGen shouldn't be a deal breaker here. I haven't tinkered with it. Your mileage may vary. Now, Perlibus's decision to use an in-house engine rather than the bog-standard UE5 is the primary reason the game feels distinct. Unreal Engine often brings a slew of specific traversal stutters and shader compilation issues that I've talked about at length, and we don't need to do here. Just know that they're not here. It's good. And if I might nerd out for just a second, I think the most brilliant technical solution that has been implemented that I've seen so far is how they handle level of detail scaling. In most games, objects just sort of go pop, and then they're there. Here, the pop-in is animated. As you move across a field, you see flowers sprout, grow, and sway into existence. It's a clever diegetic solution that makes a performance-saving measure feel magical instead of technical. Like 10 out of 10. No notes. Good job. So let's talk friction points, starting with a simple but annoying one. There are cutscenes. Dear God, there's so many cutscenes. You can fast forward them, but you cannot skip them. Cycling through dialogue loops for 32 seconds, and yes, I did time it, because you gave the wrong answer in an investigation is uncool at best. Super lame. Don't do that. Come on now. Further, I am uncompromising about pacing. Strong pacing isn't a nice to have, it's a need to have. I'm not gonna offer any apologetics for the first 10 to 12 hours of the game. They're bad. I don't mean like, this is annoying. I mean, I would rather go play High Guard. Awful in terms of fetch quests and system introductions. You must show the player the stronger parts of the game when they're at their weakest in terms of character ability and player skill in order to keep the dopamine flowing, or you risk people quitting. Crimson Desert fails this spectacularly. It is a dense, system-heavy slog before that magic circle of immersion really closes in. Now, if you quit at hour 8, I don't blame you, but you are missing quite possibly the best action RPG in recent memory. And we do have to talk about the breakneck pace of updates, which are both really cool and a potential friction point. The March 28 patch was so transformative that I wondered if my settings had been changed without my permission. The difference in upscaling and stability was really that profound. However, this pace comes with risk. The The March 30th Steam patch wound up breaking DLSS and ray reconstruction again, even after I manually recompiled all the shaders. Hooray. When developers move this fast, they tend to break things nearly as much as they fix them. And this development style suggests that testers, likely developed muscle memory to work around the original limitations of the systems, leaving the community to find the remaining cracks and have a while before they develop the muscle memory to work around the clunk. Really, it feels like much of the puzzle design in particular happened very early in development, and all of the testers learned how to work around the limitations of the testing environment jank, so that when things got polished later on, sure, they were flying through the puzzles. But, you apply that to the wider audience that hasn't been playing with those mechanics for 7 years, and you're going to have a bad time. The controls are infuriating, but amazing at the same time, and I can't decide if I love them or hate them. Perlibus has squeezed an obscene number of inputs onto a controller. Some combinations tend to make negligible mechanical sense, and multi-button sequences for single actions will make you wonder if you're playing a Muso game trying to be a fighting game rather than an RPG. Now, if you like chaining OTG attacks, cancels, and hit confirms, you'll eat well here. But if you have no idea what I just said, you are in for a steep learning curve and some massive frustration. Furthermore, small movements are not Cliff's forte. He is the turning arc of a semi-trailer. And while I can learn to work with the Mario jump chain to double jump, I still find myself hating the implementation. And I've flung myself off the abyss more times than I can count because inertia and reasons, according to the game. So let's talk puzzles. Now, I'm very picky about puzzles because if we want to be reductionistic, they're behavior modification frameworks, which is something that's a major facet of my day job. Now, ideally, a system to change behavior has 4 pillars. Celerity, certainty, contingency, and individuation. So, celerity, which is a fancy word for how quickly you get rewarded after you do the thing. Crimson Desert consistently fails here. You can solve the puzzle in your head, then fight with physics for minutes at a time to line things up, which lengthens the time between that aha moment and the reward. This changes the dopamine from, yay, we solved it, hooray chat, to thank fuck it finally force-palmed into the fuse box. This is also the same reason I get into shouty fights with friends about whether or not The Witness is good when they say it's a good puzzle game. It's not, by the way. Now, certainty refers to internal system consistency. If you do the behavior, you get the reward, okay? In-game, you're going to get physics pieces breaking or magnetism failing, and these things detract from this. If you get different results for the same action, it tends to lead towards needless frustration and learned helplessness, which contributes to quit points. Now, as for contingency, which is the relevance of the relationship between the action and the quality of the reward, this is actually really decent here. The rewards for puzzles were well balanced for the effort expended when the systems work. Well done, no notes. And finally, we have individuation, which is roughly described as how personalized are the rewards and the modification strategies here, okay? Now, truly personalized rewards are very hard to do in a game. And I'd argue, however, that the vastness of the world and the systems on offer here come pretty close to that choose-your-own-adventure approach. That said, the pacing here between meaningful rewards is wide enough that you do risk players quitting before the system can truly shine. All right, so let's wrap things up here talking about my overall verdict and value for the game. Now, the burrito index on this one is strong, despite the AAA pricing. Now, if you're new here, the burrito index is where I contrast the price-to-enjoyment ratio of a game to the enjoyment I would get from an equivalent dollar amount of Al Pastor burritos from the tiny shop down the street from me. Now, if we assume a standard retail price of $70 US and a conservative, and it's a very conservative, 200 hours of quality sandbox content, that's a lot of dopamine per dollar at 5.4 burritos. And really, that's a silly value proposition, if you can push past the first 12 hours. Now, despite the unskippable dialogue and the initial jank, the post-launch patches and sticking with it long enough to develop some muscle memory have turned a title that I nearly wrote off while lamenting the sunk cost fallacy into something truly special. It is for the Muso or fighting game enjoyer who wants an RPG skin and some depth in their game. It's for the explorer who's not afraid to make their own fun, and the hours per dollar min-maxer. It is absolutely not for the narrative enjoyer, the impatient, or the easily frustrated, or for those people who have limited physical dexterity who are playing on controller. Now, if you made it this far, the robots at YouTube think you'll also like the video that's popping up on screen now. I think it's over there. I've been BaldSquid. I'll see you next time.